This is Mac OS Ken.
Morgan Stanley ups its Apple target. The Ninth Circuit puts App Store changes on hold. And the Messi Unveil gets, messy. It is Tuesday, the 18th of July, 2023. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken. Brought to you by yours truly and sponsored by Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Use code MacOSKen50 at factormeals.com/MacOSKen50 for 50% off. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSKen. There's a new target for Apple that is over $200. Well over, actually. Apple 3.0 ran a couple of pieces on a note from Morgan Stanley analyst Eric Woodring. The first covered what India can do for iPhone growth, while the second addressed what India can do for Apple growth. On the phone, Woodring and crew expect the smartphone market on the subcontinent to grow 3 times over the next 10 years to $90 billion. That would account for 100% of global smartphone growth through 2032, according to the note. Smartphone sales have already grown at a rate of about 25% per year over the last decade, according to the firm. But the prices of those devices have stayed low, about 50% less than the global average. The Morgan Stanley analyst thinks that is about to change as favorable demographics and an expanding middle class create a consumption boom. Over the next decade, the analyst says premium vendors Apple, OnePlus, and Samsung are the clearest beneficiaries of India's smartphone market growth, while Oppo, Realme, Vivo, and Xiaomi are set to be more challenged. And that brings us to what the country can do for Apple. Basically, in terms of growth, Woodring sees China passing the baton to India. Over the last 5 years, India has accounted for 2% of Apple's growth, representing about $6 billion in revenue. Over the same time period, China has represented 18% of Apple's growth, representing $75 billion of revenue. But, writes the analyst, we believe that is about to change as recent investments in brand awareness, local manufacturing, and affordability programs, combined with India's economic boom and growing digitization, set the stage for India to become Apple's next growth frontier. Based on a recent India smartphone survey run by the firm, Morgan Stanley figures that India will account for 15% of Apple's revenue growth over the next 5 years, that India will account for $40 billion of Apple's annual revenue in the next decade, and that India's growth will be equivalent to Apple ramping an entirely new product category in just 10 years. Additionally, the firm thinks Apple's moves in India, plus the country's growing middle class, will bring 170 million new users into the Apple ecosystem over the next decade. All in, writes Woodring, this means that India will be just as important to Apple's growth algorithm over the next 5+ years as China was in the last 5 years, something we believe the market underappreciates today. And with that, Morgan Stanley maintained its overweight rating on Apple shares. It reiterated Apple as its top pick, and it added $30 to its 12-month price target. That had been $190. It is now $220. Apple gets to delay what some see as inevitable. According to a piece from The Verge, the Cupertino company does not have to let developers put messages in their App Store descriptions, letting users know that they can pay less for apps and services outside the App Store. Not yet, anyway. On Monday, the piece says Apple was granted a motion putting a hold on the appeals court ruling that would push the company to undo its anti-steering rules and let outside developers link to third-party payment mechanisms. The mandate is stayed for 90 days, so Apple can file a request with the Supreme Court to take up the case. Steering is the part where developers could steer users to other places to pay for their goods and services. Anti-steering is what Apple is doing, not letting developers steer potential customers to those other places. In an initial ruling in the Epic v. Apple Fortnite fight, Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers ruled that Apple had to drop its anti-steering stance. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled the same, and yet they will let the Supreme Court weigh in, or not, before requiring Apple to change that stance. Not that the court expects the Supreme Court to side with Apple. While granting Apple its sought-after delay, Ninth Circuit Judge Milan D. Smith wrote, lots of words dripping in legalese. Boiling those down, Judge Smith said given the initial ruling and the appeals court ruling, he doesn't see Apple getting its way. But, we'll see what SCOTUS says, or whether it even chooses to weigh in. Apple and Goldman Sachs have a little something for some people who couldn't withdraw money from their Apple savings account. That something is a little money. Mac Rumors cites reports of people who have had trouble pulling money out of the Goldman-run Apple high-yield savings account. According to those reports, some customers who transferred thousands of dollars were waiting for weeks for their money. Now the site has heard from at least one reader who's getting back some extra do-re-mi. Under the heading, Your Recent Withdrawal Request, the reader received an email saying, the experience we provided for a withdrawal request you made for your savings account in May did not meet our standards. Thank you for your patience while we completed our internal reviews. We are making a one-time goodwill credit of $100 to your savings account as a courtesy to you for this experience. You will see this deposit in wallet as adjustment credit. No word anywhere on how many customers will receive such a credit. There's also no indication as to what led to the $100 amount, as opposed to $10 or $1,000 or some other make-good number. Apple Pay Express Transit has found its way to a new region. iLounge says the public transportation network in South Wales, Australia, has adopted the contactless pay-to-go protocol. According to the report, Express Transit for Apple Pay is now supported on the Opal ticketing system in Australia, which allows users to tap their Apple Watches or iPhones when paying for public transportation fares. More news in a moment, but first a word from Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit and sponsor of today's show. How do you beat the heat and eat well this summer? Start with Factor. No pots, no pans, no boiling or broiling. Just 10 minutes in the oven or 2 minutes in the microwave, and you are eating very well. But the kitchen's not the only place to fight the heat. Factor choices are sustainable choices. They offset 100% of their delivery emissions and source 100% renewable electricity for their production sites and offices. Of course, none of that means anything if the food isn't good. Well, the food I've had from Factor has been great, like the al pastor shredded pork on the calorie counter menu or the sun-dried tomato chicken on the keto menu. I'm not sure why their chicken is always so much better than mine, but I dig it. You really should check them out. Head to factormeals.com/macOSKen50 and use code macOSKen50 to get 50% off. That's code macOSKen50 at factormeals.com/macOSKen50 to get 50% off. Taste what is made Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Use code macOSKen50 for 50% off at factormeals.com/macOSKen50. A correction to a story I brought you yesterday. I had said that the 4GB original unopened iPhone that sold at auction over the weekend went for $158,000. It turns out that didn't include the tip. A piece from Apple Insider says the $158K number everybody posted was the sale price, but did not include the buyer's premium. That's the percentage of the sales price paid to the auction house. It's not a percentage of the price exactly, though. It's a percentage of the price paid in addition to the price. LCG Auctions had set a buyer's premium of 20%. Adding that, the buyer actually paid a little over $190,000. News of some interesting virtual reality tinkering in real reality. You know the EyeSight animation on the front of the Apple Vision Pro? The one that shows when the wearer is viewing their augmented, real-world surroundings versus when their view is completely obscured? The site Upload VR says a developer with a Meta Quest Pro has recreated that with their headset using an iPhone. Kind of. The developer in question has built an app that reads the Quest Pro eye tracking update and sends that to an iOS app he also developed, which renders a virtual avatar on the iPhone screen. According to the report, the developer is even leveraging iPhone's Face ID sensor suite to position the face and eyes at the correct angle to the person looking at it and turn the screen back to a colored pattern when nobody is nearby. To be clear, says Upload VR, this is just a fun experiment, not a practical accessory. The piece says the Meta Quest platform doesn't support third-party background apps, so this is a fun thing for a tinkerer to show off his tinkering. I have to say, between this guy imitating the outer display of Vision Pro and the Vision Pro launch grid simulator from Nova UI, are these guys sure they don't just want a Vision Pro? Actually, I didn't have to say that, but it was fun. I kid. It's actually fun to see all the tinkering and playing that's been generated by Apple's announcement. The next Apple Music Live performance is coming in hot. It's partly a name joke and partly a joke about the timing. A piece from 9 to 5 Mac says Apple yesterday announced the live stream of a Burna Boy concert set for tomorrow. See? Coming in hot. On the 19th of July, 9 to 5 Mac says Burna Boy's The Love Da Mini World Tour will be streaming for free from London. Streaming on both Apple Music and TikTok, the Apple Music Twitter account posted the message Monday. Watch Burna Boy's epic show from London Stadium this Wednesday, the 19th of July at 12 noon Pacific on Apple Music and TikTok US, with links to both virtual destinations. Noon out west, 3 p.m. back east. Feels like a weird time. Again, though, the show is coming live from London, where it will be sometime at night. And finally today, things seem to have been messy for MLS on Apple TV Plus on Sunday. Messy for Messi's premiere. According to a piece from Apple Insider, a live stream on Apple TV Plus formally revealing soccer legend Lionel Messi had joined Major League Soccer's Inter Miami team was struck by audio problems. And you would not believe the calamity. Actually, yes, you would, because you've been on the internet. Here's the thing, nobody died. Cupertino didn't sink into the bowels of hell. Lionel Messi didn't burst into flames. Embarrassing? Momentarily. Not a great introduction to the who knows how many fans tuning in. But it was one event. People complain, but again, it's the internet. If it had gone flawlessly, people would have complained. Because, people. A headline from Fortune, because that's how seriously we're taking this apparently, said Apple TV is accused of botching Lionel Messi's unveiling in what marks a bumpy start to their historic revenue-sharing deal. Accused? They botched it. Also, my dude, it wasn't even a game, and if it had been, there'd be another game next week. The Fortune piece says the historic moment was destined to generate a huge audience for Apple across the globe. No doubt Apple would like for it to have gone better, and no doubt Apple will work to make sure things like this do go better in the future. But I'm willing to bet what fans really want to see is Messi play, not Messi stand around. Think about the most embarrassing presentation you have ever seen. If you were sitting next to two other people doing that, you'd probably be thinking about 3 different presentations. But, people. macOS Ken, brought to you by me, and sponsored by Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Use code MacOSCan50 at factormeals.com/MacOSCan50 for 50% off. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSCan. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media. Online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macoscan.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.